Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are just letting participants into the meeting and we will get started in a few minutes. And I see more and more people joining. Very exciting to see so many people interested in round 2 of the Cleveland Black Futures Fund. So excited. Okay. Oh, no, looks like more people are coming in. Okay. So I think that we may be with most of the people who are able to join us live. I'm sure that there are some people who who have signed up for the recording, and we are recording this to make it available for your reference, anybody's reference after the fact. But thank you all. Maybe a couple more people filtering in. I'm Courtenay Barton. I'm the Program Director for Arts and Culture and Racial Equity Initiatives at the Cleveland Foundation. So excited to talk to you this evening about round 2 of the Cleveland Black Futures Fund. I'm going to ask for our slideshow to be shared so that we can get started momentarily. Okay. All right, looks good. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon or this evening for round 2 of the Cleveland Black Futures Fund. Can I get the next slide, please? Just want to take a moment to acknowledge the indigenous inhabitants of this land, the original indigenous inhabitants of this land, who stewarded this land for many centuries, that we stand where they stood, and we hope to take care of the land and the people here, as well as their ancestors did for centuries ahead of us. The next slide, please. I also want to use this time to ground us in some of the reasoning for why the Cleveland Black Futures Fund exists. The first is just the very, very simple fact that systemic racism exists. And side by side on this slide, you see a redlining map from the 1940s, redlining being the practice of the Federal Homeowners Association of denying mortgage loans for homeowners who lived in particular neighborhoods, often neighborhoods with high concentrations of people of color, especially Black people, and how very neatly, unfortunately, that lines up with this map on the right, where we see the shortened life expectancies of people who live in neighborhoods that were redlined in the 1940s. What we can honestly say is that nobody just chose to live in a neighborhood with a shortened life expectancy, but rather it was policies that most residents had nothing to do with, that predetermined decades ago life outcomes that people are dealing with today. And this is where we are starting. This has been a long time in the making, and certainly it takes more than the work of just one fund to change this reality. But if we are not grounded in the fact that this is real, we won't get anywhere. The next slide, please. The other thing that happened that is really important for us to acknowledge is just the disproportionately devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Black community here locally. I think a lot of people thought that this would be an equal opportunity pandemic, and we see that it is not, and it has not been an equal opportunity pandemic. But even in Cleveland, the vast majority of cases of COVID-19 in which race is known involve Black people, significantly overrepresenting our representation in the population. And that also carries true with COVID-19 hospitalizations across the state of Ohio. And a figure that I found very, very haunting, but as of last December, if Black and Hispanic Americans had died of COVID-19 at the same rate as white people, 22,000 people would still be alive at that point. I haven't seen any numbers with another year of our pandemic under our belts, but we know that the trend has continued. And this, I think, is what spurred a lot of people, a lot of organizations in 2020 to make commitments, to make verbal commitments about doing better for the Black community. And the Cleveland Black Futures Fund was part of the Cleveland Foundation's commitment. But I would also just like to note that the Cleveland Black Futures Fund was started with the intention of being long-term and not merely limited to COVID-19 response. But the fact is that philanthropy is a system, and philanthropy as a system has been inequitable for a number of decades. And so as a system, as a participant in a system, it was incumbent upon us to think about how we can be more equitable in our operations. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the Cleveland Black Futures Fund. It was launched in late 2020 with the overarching goal to strengthen the ecosystem of Black leaders and Black serving organizations in Greater Cleveland by providing intentional resources to help grow organizational infrastructure and capacity. A few things that it's important for us to parse here. Number one, intentional resources, not accidental, that we wanted to take a moment to create stronger, better, and deeper relationships with Black leaders and Black-led organizations to provide them with the resources that they need, not just, wait for people to come to us, but to go out and find people and make these resources available. To help grow organizational infrastructure and capacity. One of the things that we know happens across philanthropy is that Black-led nonprofits often receive more programmatic funding than infrastructure and capacity funding. And because we know that this is a limitation, the point of the Cleveland Black Futures Fund was to address this limitation. And secondly, Black-led nonprofits specifically. We know that the fight for justice and more equitable outcomes requires more than just Black leaders in the fight, but we also believe that it's important for our strategies to support the leaders that the community trusts the most, the people who are closest to the problems, who are often closer to the solutions to those problems. And in the Black community, that means supporting Black leaders who, for a variety of reasons over a long period of time, have received less funding than, say, white peers in the field. Since its inception, the fund has amassed more than $4.3 million. Next slide, please. We want to thank the people who have contributed to the fund. They are listed here: Equity Trust, Facebook, JP Morgan Chase, George W. Codrington Foundation, Giant Eagle Foundation, HealthCom Foundation, KeyBank, St. Luke's Foundation, Troy Mart Fund, and many generous individuals across the community. The Cleveland Foundation made an initial investment of $2.5 million, but without the contributions of the people on this list and the organizations on this list, we would not have grown the fund in as short order as happened last year. I like to think that there are people who know the work to be done on the ground, and there are people who might not know what work is that needs to be done, but they do have resources and they care enough to provide the resources to the people who are doing the work. And both are very needed in the equation of creating a better community. So thank you to the donors. We want you to know who they are. We also want you to know that this fund actually has a community advisory committee. The next slide, please. So this is a group of people who meet together to create a framework for how the Cleveland Black Futures Fund would work. This is not something that we have ever done before, and we needed a sounding board, and we wanted to make sure that we had representation from a variety of industries and sectors. I can certainly say that although we have a lot of banks represented here in terms of current jobs, the members of our community advisory committee actually have a long history in a variety of different fields. So we have environment, we have education, we have healthcare, community development, youth development, and more, who really helped us in round one think through what we did when we get to the next slide with the number of applications that we did receive, how best to respond, what our strategy needed to be to respond to the needs that became very, very evident in round one, and will be responsible for similar work in making recommendations to the Cleveland Foundation Board of Directors for round two. So the round one applicants. We received 221 applications for round one. I have to say, I was blown away by the community interest in round one. I could never have anticipated that we would receive several hundred applications in a 6-week period. Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, the county arts and culture funder that we are very, very fortunate to have. A lot of communities don't have such a county funding source for arts and culture, but they often do about 300 grants in a year. So in a 6-week period, we received almost as many requests as they will fund in a year. So that went to show that the need was huge, requesting a total of nearly $20 million. Now, we already started with knowing that we had only about $4.5 million in the fund. So that was a limitation of the fund in round one. But I was also very proud and very happy to see that 48% of the applicants in round one were first-time applicants to the Cleveland Foundation. That meant that when we set out to create intentional new relationships, we did achieve that. And we hope to continue to achieve that in the next round. Next slide, please. All right. So we talked about who applied for round one. Let's talk about who or the makeup of the grantee pool for round one. We were able to fund a total of 49 organizations for about $1.8 million in funding. About 38% of those were to first-time Cleveland Foundation applicants. So that's pretty significant. More than a third of the first round grantees had never, ever even applied to the Cleveland Foundation, much less having received funding from the Cleveland Foundation. And on average, grantees received 42% of their total request. So we weren't able to make most organizations complete requests, but almost half of the requests that most organizations had, which is a significant amount of funding. 5 grants were made to organizations that applied through a fiscal agent, that is to a nonprofit that didn't yet have 501c3 status with the IRS. And so they utilized a partnership with another organization to apply for a grant. Next slide, please. All right. So that was our review of round one. Let's think about round two and what that will look like. We did a lot of deep diving into the data from round one to learn what people needed, how we can provide better service. And these are the things that we came up with for round two so that we can facilitate a smoother and easier process and give people a little bit more clarity about what to expect. If you participated in any of the information sessions or events for round one, you know that a lot of our answers to the questions that people ask were, we don't know yet. We don't know how many grants we will make because we don't know how many applications we can receive. We don't know how large such grants will be because we just don't know. We didn't know. But now that we have a better sense of the number of organizations that are out there and the deep interest in the fund, we think that we can provide some guidance that will allow us to do a significant amount of grant making in round two, while also preserving and getting ready for round three as we continue to think about raising the funds to provide even more grants in the future. So with that in mind, for round two, we're going to expect to make about $1.5 million in monetary grants during round two. And in order to give people a sense of how much those grants will be, we are going to implement a system where we're going to ask organizations to request $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, or $100,000. We also wanted to give everybody a sense of how many such grants we can provide in any of those categories. The larger the grant, the fewer of them will be provided. So at most, there would be 5 grants of $100,000, 5 grants of $75,000 at most, up to 10 grants of $50,000, but also at least 10 grants of $25,000. So we hope that this helps organizations to calibrate their requests accordingly. Think about what your organization needs and think about, where you might want to fit in terms of managing a grant. But new with round two, in addition to an outright monetary grant, we are also offering a capacity building fellowship. The purpose of this is to provide cohort-based learning opportunities for organizations to come together to learn and be coached and help grow in a particular capacity. And we'll talk a little bit more about capacity specifically. But one of the things that we learned from round one is that most of our Black-led nonprofits in Cleveland voiced the same needs in terms of capacities that they needed to grow. And so they are reflected in the choices here on this capacity building fellowship. Leadership development was a big one. Fund development strategy, how to find sources of funding for your work. Long-term and strategic planning and marketing and communication were among the top issues that organizations reported to us. So we expect to pick up to 15 organizations for each cohort-based fellowship program. So there would be 15 organizations that could be picked for leadership development, 15 for fund development, and on and on. Each cohort would be provided with a coach that will work with the cohort in order to build peer learning around these issues. And there will be also a modest stipend attached to this for the time we know that people would need to devote to this to help compensate for that time. There are 2 different grant types for round 2. Outright monetary award ranging between $25,000 and $100,000, and a capacity building fellowship grant opportunity. I would encourage organizations to think carefully about what their greater needs are at this time. You can apply for one or for both of these opportunities, but that doesn't necessarily mean you would be picked for both opportunities. So just think about it, what it is that your organization needs the most. Next slide, please. Another thing that we learned from round 2 was that we needed to set some parameters around eligibility for nonprofits. In round 1, we said, we needed nonprofits who had Black leaders in the executive or chief executive officer role. But we needed to narrow this down just a little bit for round 2. So yes, an organization, in order to qualify for the Cleveland Black Futures Fund, must still have a Black chief executive officer or executive director. We are also asking that organizations have an operating budget of less than $1 million. And we ask this because there just was a great need for organizations that had budgets of less than $1 million for greater opportunities for resources and support. So that's why we're focusing on that for round 2. Organizations must be located in Cuyahoga, Lake, or Geauga counties, the counties of the Cleveland Foundation's footprint. And an organization must have 501c3 tax exempt status to apply for a grant at the Cleveland Foundation with the Cleveland Black Futures Fund and with a few other opportunities, but this fund specifically. We know that there are organizations that are, say, in the planning stages of applying for a 501c3. It hasn't come through yet. In that instance, an organization can apply through a fiscal agent. That means they partner with another organization that does have 501c3 status. And that organization is the one that files the application. And because it is a partnership and they are the one that has applied, they accept fiduciary responsibility for managing the grant, but the grant is to be utilized to accomplish the purposes of the partnered agency, the sponsored agency. I also want to note that we will accept a wide range of issue areas in applications. So if your question is, are we serving youth serving organizations, LGBT organizations, arts and culture, environment, technology, the answer to your question is yes, so long as you are a nonprofit organization with a Black chief executive leader. It's really important for us to make sure that we are responding to needs in a wide variety of issue areas. Next slide, please. Another thing that we learned from round 1, especially for organizations that have not previously applied for Cleveland Foundation funding or other funding opportunities, is that people need support through the process. You know, we worked really hard to make this an accessible process as much as possible. But that didn't necessarily mean that everything that we offered was exactly what the community needed. So we went back to the drawing board to think through what it is that people would really need. So on the Cleveland Foundation website, if you go to the Cleveland Black Futures Fund page, you will find a very comprehensive applicant guide. It's going to provide all sorts of guidance and information about which grant you can apply for, who the eligibility, how grants will be reviewed, the grant scoring rubric, we will talk about this a bit more, and some other details, a very lengthy FAQ as well, so that all that information is available to you at all times. We will also offer 2 new things that we did not offer in round 1 in order to facilitate the application process. The first are small group technical assistance sessions that will be scheduled throughout December and January. Now, the purpose of the technical assistance sessions is to allow small groups of organizations to work through what it is like to apply for the Cleveland Black Futures Fund grant, to get some questions answered, and to talk to your peers about the application process as well. Outside of technical assistance, however, we also saw a great need to provide one-on-one grant writing assistance. In round 1, we did something called office hours, where people could sign up for a 30-minute slot and talk to me about their organization and the work they were doing and get some general guidance. And while that was good, what it didn't do was help people through the actual nitty-gritty of writing the application. And if you are an organization that is small and volunteer-led, and you've never applied for a grant before, translating what may have happened in one of those conversations to the application itself was difficult. In order to help facilitate that, we are working with a team of grant writers, and we will provide a link for organizations that are interested to sign up for one-on-one sessions with the grant writer to be covered by the Cleveland Black Futures Fund. So you don't have to pay out of pocket for this, whereas in other opportunities, you would perhaps have to contract a grant writing specialist, but you sign up for an opportunity to talk to a grant writer about what you need to put into your application. This is the first time the Cleveland Foundation has done anything of this sort. So excited to see how this works out and if this is a valuable resource for applicants. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned a rubric on the last slide, and because of that, I wanted to talk now about what the review process for the Cleveland Black Futures Fund round 2 will be. There were so many questions about what the review process was like for round 1. And in truth, we hadn't built any systems that were ready at that point in time to accommodate the interest that we received. So we had to build systems as we were going. I want you to know there were many sleepless nights as we were all reviewing applications. But now that we know, now that we have a better idea, we can give you some idea of what the next round of review will look like. So the application has opened, and the deadline for applications will be January 18th. We will repeat this information, so don't worry about that at this point. After that point, we will do application review in stages. So an initial screening will take place between January and February. Applications will be screened at that point for eligibility and completion. If an organization's application is eligible and completed, they will be advanced to initial review. If an organization is not eligible and or the application is not complete, they will be notified in February that they have not advanced into initial review. The next stage being initial review. So during this stage, applications will be assorted and assigned to review teams by issue areas. And review teams will be provided with a scoring rubric to score applications. Review team members will be made up of Cleveland Foundation staff, some other grant-making professionals in our community. We're looking to enlist some community partners and some of the advisory committee members as well. And all of the members of the team will utilize the same rubric during this phase, and it will also be provided in the applicant guide that is on the website. So you can look at it and see what the teams will be looking for in this stage. And then the next round. So the top scoring applicants from each issue area will be selected as finalists for grant making in round 2. And review team members We'll then select which organizations will receive grants and fellowships based on a deeper review than their initial review. Now, how many that ends up being depends upon the applicant pool that we get. So I don't know that I can provide exact numbers other than the up to at least 10 for $25,000, et cetera. But applicants who do not advance to this final round will be notified in March. And then final grant decisions will be communicated in April. And we wanted to do this in this way so that people have a sense of the timeline and where they stand and how long it will take for us to review applications, which is not something that we were able to communicate in round one, but we've learned better for round two. Next slide, please. One thing that we've talked about a lot about the purpose of this fund is organizational capacity. So what do we mean by organizational capacity? And let this be at the heart of your applications. This wonderful definition from candid.org, which is a great resource for any nonprofit leader. Capacity building can help make an organization more focused, efficient, and productive. And this makes it easier to attract the money, leadership, and visibility that nonprofits need to thrive. So think of capacity building as the often unglamorous things that an organization needs to do in order to get the work done. Fundraising, strategic planning, facilities planning. Is this hiring somebody who can, monitor your books? Marketing. Do you need legal services? Staff salaries are certainly organizational capacity. Think about the things that keep the lights on and the organization running so that the programming that you deliver can be delivered efficiently, effectively, and safely. And for more information on that, the Free Management Library has a wonderful resource on organizational capacity. And again, all of the applicant guide materials on our website also have links and references in there. But that is the point of the Cleveland Black Futures Fund, to provide this infrastructure, to provide the support for this capacity, so that organizations can be stronger and more resilient for times of crisis when we need them, like this pandemic. Without focusing on organizational infrastructure and capacity, we are unfortunately too often left with organizations that aren't positioned to strike when the iron is hot, or to do things when they are absolutely necessary to be done. And that is why we want to focus on this, knowing, again, with the intentionality of the resources that we wish to provide, that most often Black organizations are limited to programmatic funding. All right. So that is some overview, and that was a lot of overview, but this is being recorded so that you can refer to it again, of the why and the how of the Cleveland Black Futures Fund, why we are doing what we are doing, how you can access the funds. I want to talk give you an overview of how to get about accessing the application. So next slide, please. Okay. So you will go to the Cleveland Foundation website and you will click on grants and programs, and then you will scroll down to apply for a grant in that drop-down menu. Next slide, please. On that page, scroll down to numbers 2 and 3, and I want you to pause here for a second. Number 2 on this screen is giving you the opportunity to request login credentials for the Cleveland Foundation grant-making portal. If you have never applied for a Cleveland Foundation grant before, this is your first stop. And if you haven't applied for a Cleveland Foundation grant before, please do not wait to request these credentials. Like, do it tonight, do it tomorrow. In deference to our wonderful but very, very busy grants management team who provides oversight of the credentialing program, please don't wait until the last minute to request these credentials, because they have to do some checks to make sure organizational eligibility for Cleveland Foundation funding before we even grant credentials. But all applications for the Cleveland Black Futures Fund will only be accepted online, so get your credentials as soon as possible. After you have credentials, or if you already have credentials, step 3 is your spot. That's where you will log into the portal. And there are some background information questions that are asked of everybody. Make sure that those are up to date. And then you will be able to find the actual application form. Next slide, please. So when you get your credentials, you get to this screen. This is the doorway into the portal. Enter your credentials under registered users. Next slide, please. And then you will see this homepage. Scroll down to the Cleveland Black Futures Fund. Please make sure you complete the application marked CBFF application. Please do not complete the COVID-19 application or the general inquiry or any other inquiry or form that is there. The Cleveland Foundation manages a number of grant opportunities. Completing the Cleveland Black Futures Fund application as labeled is what will ensure that your application gets to the review teams for the Cleveland Black Futures Fund. I'll also note that the application for this is different from other applications. And so we need to make sure that you are answering all of the questions. So make sure that you are paying attention to completing the CBFF application specifically. Next slide, please. Okay, so about this application, a few things that are different from round one. The questions more or less remain the same, and they are available on our website for you to look at, even without having to log into the portal. But one, you can apply for one or both of the monetary grant award or the capacity building fellowship grant, right? So that's your choice, or both. Two, that we have some assistance in terms of technical assistance and grant writing assistance specifically for round two. But also for round two, we thought it would be easier to transition away from text boxes to check boxes and drop down menus and provide less open-ended responses. So you will see a number of the questions that we asked in round one, if you applied for round one, transitioned to this style of application question, just to make it a little quicker and easier for everybody applying. Next slide, please. The application is organized into sections. The first section is going to ask us about your organization, background about your organization. The second question is going to ask us about your work. What is it that you do? The third section will ask about the type of grant, whether you are applying for the monetary grant or the fellowship or both. Section 4 is asking for use of funds. This is specifically for monetary grant award applicants only. We need to understand how you plan to utilize the grant funds specifically. So in this case, make sure that you're talking about how you would use the grant funds and not necessarily about what your work your organization does broadly. Section 5 is specific for the capacity building fellowship. And section 6 is for demographic data collection. We're asking for demographics of your organization, leadership, staff, and the population that you serve. Next slide, please. This is what a budget form looks like for the Cleveland Foundation grant making overall. We ask for information about your income, and we ask for information about your expenses. So it's divided up into two slots. And this is what the income looks like: anticipated and committed. We're also talking about, grants and earned income. If you are, selling tickets for something, this is also a place where you can talk about in-kind income to support the activities for the project that you're applying for. And by project, we mean the specific organizational capacity work that you want the Cleveland Foundation Black Futures Fund to support. We also need you to give us a line item description of what those things would be. So if you already know that you have $10,000 towards a strategic plan from one foundation, this is a place where you can put that. Next slide, please. Now we need you to think about the expenses. What does it cost to do the work that you have said that you would do with this grant? I'm going to say it now and I'm going to say it again later. Please use all of the line items here. Can't promise that this funding source or any funding source can fund every single line item. but it is important for us to have a complete picture. In, say, the other hat that I wear here at the Cleveland Foundation, I work on arts and culture grant making, and sometimes an organization might come in and say, oh, we want to host an artist fellowship, and it's going to cost us $5,000, and that is for, say, 2 artists that we are going to host. And that's great. But then the questions become, do those artists need supplies? Do you need to rent space? Do you need to, do advertising for an event that they're going to do? And those things are sometimes left out of the line items. So I'm just going to say, make sure that you're thinking through what all of the expenses will be. And again, for people who are not used to applying for grants, I strongly urge you to take advantage of both the technical assistance workshops and the grant writing assistance to help you with these sorts of things. Next slide, please. Okay, overall hints and tips for applying for the Cleveland Black Futures Fund Round 2. Number 1, answer all questions thoroughly, but that doesn't mean that they need to be long. Don't feel like, oh no, it's too short. If you've answered the question, you've answered the question. We did make a special effort to make most questions checkbox and short answer to limit so that you don't feel like you have to write a book. There are a few open-ended questions, so utilize those as well, but don't think that they have to be long. Again, grant writers are available to assist and to review your proposal ahead of time. Cleveland Foundation staff cannot do that. That is what the grant writing assistance is for. If you have specific questions, please sign up for a technical assistance workshop. The link will be provided for you to sign up for a technical assistance workshop. We are asking people to only sign up for one workshop so that we can accommodate as many people as possible in small group settings, but we have a number of workshops available. And the link to sign up with a grant writer will be available soon, and it will be distributed to everybody who has attended this webinar so that you can utilize this resource as well. I will remind you that all applicants must hold 501c3 status or be fiscally sponsored by a 501c3 organization. We are a foundation. We can only provide grants to 501c3 organizations, not to individuals, not to for-profit companies. And again, use all the line items in your budget to think through what the full and true picture of the cost is. Next slide, please. Okay, so an overview of some of the key dates that you will need to know. You're here right now at the launch webinar. The application portal, I believe, is open now. So if you have your credentials, log in and check it out. If you don't have your credentials, please, please, please do not wait to ask for credentials. Do it now, even if you don't end up applying for this fund. We hope you will apply for this fund, but request your credentials right now. Beginning at the end of November through January 6th, our technical assistance workshops. You will be able to register. We'll provide you with the link for that. The application deadline will be January 18th. We want to give you a nice long time to get it done, inclusive of the holidays, so that you can actually enjoy your holidays with your families. In February 2022, we will provide notification to applicants who did not advance to initial review because their applications were ineligible or incomplete. In March 2022, we will notify applicants who are not advancing to the final stage in the review process based on the rubrics that we will utilize. And by the end of March / early April, we will provide notice of final funding decisions. We would like to just note, if you have questions about the fund or the program, please email. Email is best, clevelandblackfuturesfund@clevefdn.org. Email is best. We are still working remotely at the Cleveland Foundation, but this is a mailbox that multiple people have access to and will be able to respond to queries from that more easily. If you have questions about the actual application, like, you get into the portal and something doesn't work out right, something goes missing, you still have a problem with your credentials, that is a question for grants management. So please utilize them as your resource for access issues for the portal. Next slide, please. Well, that's it. that completes the overall conversation. We will provide these slides to attendees. The video will also be made available. I see that there are a bunch of questions already asked, and we'll start addressing questions and answers at this point. I'm going to start with questions that have been typed into the chat. I do see at least one hand raised, and please put that question into the chat and we'll get right into it. All right. I see that the first question was about nonprofit status. Does the fiscal agent have to be Black-led as well? So the answer to that question is no. And the reason why is because we know, unfortunately, that because for too long, Black-led organizations have been locked out of building the infrastructure and capacity, oftentimes they don't yet have the capacity to manage somebody else's money for them. And so if you have a trusted relationship with a fiscal agent, a nonprofit that would be willing to serve as your fiscal agent, and they are not Black-led, that's okay, because the ultimate beneficiary of the grant is the Black-led nonprofit. And that is what we want to see reflected in the application. We hope that if we continue to do this, we do end up with Black-led nonprofits that do have the capacity to serve as strong fiscal agents, that do have the, the capacity to manage their own operations and to help other organizations as well. But that's also a longer term goal that we need to get to. If our organization plans to use a consultant to help with our application, should they make a grantee login request or should we do it? The credentials have to belong to the organization. We cannot provide credentials to a consultant. The consultant has to utilize your organization's credentials. The credentials need to live with an employee of the organization itself. Next question, is a part-time employee need a W-2 or can they be an independent contractor? I think I need more context for that. Is this with regard to paying their salary? If it's, paying somebody, you can pay either a full salaried person or an independent contractor. If you are looking for that sort of support, that's open, but maybe if you have a little bit more detail about in what regard you're looking for this differentiation. Are you granting startup organizations? Startup organizations are eligible to apply. We did make grants to some startup organizations in round one, which is really exciting. We committed to funding organizations in all stages, from planning stages to some of our veteran and legacy organizations, and we did that, and we are open to that in round two as well, so long as an organization has a budget of less than $1 million. Do sponsor letters or letters of support from other organizations help an application or not really? They're not necessary. They could be helpful if they provide us with some information that you think it's important for us to know. Our system can handle attachments. It's not necessary. So don't stress out about trying to find people to write you reference letters or letters of support. And if you are worried about conveying what a sponsor letter would convey for you in your application, take advantage of the grant writing assistance programs. Are you only notifying applicants who don't move forward? So if you are not notified, can you assume that you moved forward? That is a great question. I believe that we are really focusing on giving everybody some notification of where they stand, but we also really wanted people to know if they were no longer in the running. Next question, can you apply if you are awarded in the first round? Great question. We do anticipate being able to fund perhaps organizations who applied in round one, in round three, but we're not there yet. We're at round two. So if you received a grant in round one, this is not the time for you to apply. But we will make announcements about round three in 2022. So be on the lookout. But round two is limited to organizations who did not receive an award in round one. Let's see. in regard to the 75 plus requirements with the question of the contractor. I still think I need a little bit more detail about what you're seeking the funds for and why you're concerned about the employment status per se. Because honestly, organizations of all sizes and all stripes often employ a mix of part-time, volunteer, and contracted staff. And only in really, really specific situations does that make a difference, usually with regard to like your payroll and things of that nature. So I'm wondering if there's a specific question you have with regard to your request. And if there is a specific question that you have with regard to your request, that might be a technical assistance workshop question. If your organization is headquartered other than in the 3 service counties, but serves the specified counties, are they eligible? We are looking for organizations that are headquartered in our 3 county service area. Is financial literacy part of what the fund interests? Any and all issue area, including financial literacy and much more. Okay. What about volunteer-based organizations without employees? Absolutely eligible to apply. More often than not, one of the things that we found in round 1 is that most Black-led organizations are volunteer-run, and that doesn't make their work any less worthy. And maybe organizations need to think about transitioning from volunteers to actually employing people. Absolutely welcome to apply, volunteer-based organizations. Can the fiscal sponsor apply for round 2? Is the question, can an organization that is serving as a fiscal sponsor also apply for their own grant? The short answer to that is yes. There is nothing in our system that would prevent an organization from submitting an application for their own grant and to sponsor another organization. What I would suggest you do is make sure that your organization has the capacity to essentially be on the fiduciary and legal hook for 2 grants at the same time. It is not meant to be a scary bit of advice, but merely the fact that that is the case, that, you would have your own grant and you would be the fiduciary for the fiscally sponsored project or program or organization. And that's just double the responsibility that you would be taking on. Do you anticipate round 3 of funding keeping the Black-led and operating budget requirements? Absolutely, the Black-led requirements, that's not going away. This is the Cleveland Black Futures Fund for a reason. Operating budget requirements, it's a possibility. We are committed to continuous learning and improvement with this fund. If for some reason we found in round 2 that something else were really necessary, that we missed the mark in what we were assuming were the lessons from round 1, we would take that into consideration. But for now, this is the direction that we are going in. I hope that was a good answer without sounding too wishy-washy. But we do want this to be an opportunity where we are constantly learning and checking our assumptions. Are you requiring a financial audit from organizations that are applying? If you have an audit, please provide it. We also know that very small organizations often don't have audits. It's a good practice to have no matter what your organization size is, but if you are really small and you haven't had the opportunity to have an audit, you're either too new or too small, it is not required. With that said, this might be a place where an organization would consider applying for financial planning assistance to help them figure out what their needs are. To clarify, a fiscal sponsor for round 1. So a fiscal sponsor for round 1 wants to apply for a grant to support their own organization. Got it. Okay. So if you were a fiscal sponsor for round 1 and you are managing a grant for an organization that technically you don't benefit from, you're not a recipient. The recipient is the fiscally sponsored organization. But in that case, I would suggest that you perhaps reach out to our email, Cleveland Black Futures Fund at clevefdn.org, just to clarify your situation. How long will grant writers be able to assist startup organizations? By how long do you mean the sessions, like how long the sessions will be, or the duration of time that grant writing assistance will be provided in terms of weeks or months overall? A little bit of clarity for that question would be helpful. Does the fiscal sponsor need to be headquartered in the 3 counties? It's better if they are. I think if you have questions about that, you should probably reach out to us specifically to ask that question. If you have a specific instance um, that I would just point out requires a different level of scrutiny, not just for the Cleveland Black Futures Fund, but just kind of broadly. You know, this is a question that we've received in other grant making opportunities and we've had to really look at it. So reach out and let's talk about that. For clarifying, I'm a new startup and will utilize the grant writing. However, should I establish my credentials first? If you don't have a 501c3, you need a fiscal sponsor to be the one to provide you access to the portal. More likely, you would provide them with your answers to the application questions. So if you're a startup organization without 501c3 status, your first step is to get yourself a fiscal sponsor. First stop, no matter what. And then when you do that, they should be the ones with the credentials. If they don't have credentials, they should be the ones to apply for the credentials. You should be the one to sign up for the grant writing assistance, excuse me, but make sure you have your fiscal sponsor in place first. That's your first step right there. How long are the sessions? The technical assistance sessions or the grant writer sessions? Do you have to have a brick and mortar address? No, I mean, you need to have an address, right? Like you need to have an address and your headquarters needs to be in our 3-county footprint. But what we've really learned, obviously, in this pandemic is we cannot be limited to simply doing the things that we've always done in terms of brick and mortar. And our communities needed virtual services. So virtual services, services that perhaps are provided by organizations that rotate spaces where they provide services within our 3-county footprint are also eligible to apply. Let's see. Will second grant applicants, who were initially declined in the first round, be considered priority over other applicants? I wouldn't say priority, but will be considered without, to use a legal term, prejudice with regard to having been declined from round one. One thing that it's really important for me to communicate, for me to say over and over again, is that the vast majority of everybody who was declined in round one did not get declined because they did anything wrong, but because we needed a different mix of organizations to fund, different ages, different issue areas, different communities, etc. And so think about your round one application as not having any sort of shadow over your round two application, if that's at all helpful. There were a couple of questions with regard to grant writing assistance and technical assistance. So that if the question was like how long an individual technical assistance workshop is, that is 60 minutes is a 1-hour workshop. Grant writing sessions are about, an hour as well. But if your question was like, can you apply over multiple weeks or something like that, I'm not sure if that was the question that was being asked. I'm sorry, grant writing is 90 minutes. But if your question was, can we call on the grant writer for multiple weeks? Was that your question? People who asked that question. Okay, great. Okay. I think we've got about 6 minutes left before our scheduled end time. Let's see, does the fiscal sponsor have to be located in the same county as the program? No. We certainly have some organizations that might say be located, are headquartered in Cuyahoga County and providing services in Lake or Geauga counties. That's perfectly acceptable, as long as you are within the 3-county footprint. I know that this was a lot of information that was delivered very, very quickly. That's why this is recorded. The slides will be provided to you, and we have a host of resources provided on our website, and that we are really, really trying to do our best to be as responsive to the needs of the grant seeking community as we possibly can. And this does mean creating new systems for the Cleveland Foundation to do work. So thank you for bearing with us and for giving us the opportunity to consider supporting your organization. Will there be a listing of what's eligible in the categories listed? In terms of what's eligible, are you asking for organization type or organization expenses that are eligible? And then in terms of the categories, what do you mean by categories? An organization with 501c3 status can it apply as a fiscal and still apply for a grant? Yes, up to you. But again, think about the idea of what your organization is able to manage. There will be a link that will be sent for the writing assistance, absolutely. We are still finalizing the calendar, but we're almost there. Does a Cleveland-based regional office of a larger national organization qualify if all other attributes are met? What then would be your organizational budget? Are you saying that you would be an organization with a budget of less than $1 million? Oftentimes, a Cleveland-based, a local affiliate of a national organization has a much larger budget. But if you have a specific question about that, I think you should reach out to us. The listing that said, oh, board development, financial planning, is there a detailed breakdown of what that includes? Go to our website, check out the resources that have significantly more detail about that. The free management library, will be linked in the slides and other places as well, so that you can see what types of activities are included in that. Thank you for that question. That's a great question. Where will the recording be to listen to it again? We will put this up on our YouTube station, and we will make sure that everybody gets access to it. How much weight does the advisory committee have on the final decision as to whom gets the grant? So remember, the advisory committee is participating in our review teams, but we also have review teams that are composed of other people as well. The advisory committee, think of them as creating the framework and making sure the framework is carried out, but the teams will have to do the work, because honestly, there are no 7 people that, could have done all 221 applications in round 1. And depending on how many applications we get for round 2, it may also be a heavy lift. So we wanted to make sure that that lift was heavy and equitable for the people who have to do it. That means that the advisory committee is constructing the framework and asking other people to carry it out. Does the organization have to have an office? Your organization needs to be home-based in our 3-county footprint, but work that is virtual and or that rotates locations, it's perfectly fine to apply for that. All right, there's 2 minutes. I could probably do one more question if anybody had one. One more question. If I have more than one organization or movement, could I apply for a grant for each under one fiscal sponsor or different sponsors for each? My first question with that is, how many can you work on at a time? So I would think about that, and I would probably suggest that you pick 1 or 2, but this might also be a really great place for you to think about attending a a technical assistance workshop to talk to your peers about perhaps some of their experiences with that. Are the grants available for small businesses in any state? As a foundation recognized by the IRS, we cannot provide grants to support for-profit entities. We can only support nonprofits. I'm unfortunately not really an expert in small businesses, but I would suggest that you think about organizations like the President's Council, if you are serving the Cleveland area, which do focus on small businesses, the Urban League, organizations of that sort. All right. Well, that is it for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Please, please, please take advantage of the resources that we are making available for round 2. We are so excited that you joined us this evening. We're looking forward to getting your application. Thank you.